Dispatch logs offered more contradictions. One dispatcher recalled that Clara had said, "closer" at 2:22 a.m., yet the written notes only recorded uncertain movement outside. A second dispatcher remembered telling the responding officers that everything seemed calm, while the call timer indicated escalating tension in Clara's voice. Some logs were edited later to align with perceived protocol, but the edits did not match the audio. Neighbors were interviewed. A man living 2 doors down insisted he heard nothing unusual. A woman across the street recalled faint scratching sounds around 2:20 a.m., scratching that stopped abruptly when she flicked on her porch light. Neither was in perfect alignment with Clara's account, but each added a layer of uncertainty. How many layers of sound had been missed? How many interpretations filtered through human expectation? Then there was Emma Parker, a new dispatcher who had reviewed the call weeks later during training. Her memory of the incident conflicted with official reports. She recalled hearing breathing on the line that wasn't Clara's, soft, measured, deliberate, almost behind her, as if the call itself contained a third presence. When asked, she hesitated. She didn't say whether it was Clara's spouse, an intruder, or something else. She only said, quietly, "It was wrong somehow. Not outside, not me. Somewhere else entirely." Timeline inconsistencies deepened the mystery. Clara had stated that the officers arrived at 2:35 a.m., but officer logs and dashcam timestamps suggested a slightly later arrival, giving a window of 13 minutes unaccounted for. During that time, the scraping stopped. Not faded. Stopped completely. Silence replaced the rhythm, leaving the call's last seconds hauntingly empty. Investigators also discovered that the microphone on Clara's phone had an intermittent glitch, which caused certain frequencies to be suppressed. In those moments, subtle background sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the dragging of something across the carpet, were entirely masked. By the time the audio was enhanced, these silences created an unsettling realization. For much of the call, Clara and the dispatcher could not have heard everything happening in the room. And yet, the tape preserved it. Authorities debated whether the call itself had been enough to warn someone, or something, that the line was open. Had the noises paused precisely when they were noticed? Or had human attention simply filtered them out, leaving crucial details unheard? By the end of the investigation, the call had been parsed, replayed, and scrutinized dozens of times. But the truth remained fragmented. The background sounds could have been furniture, footsteps, mechanical, or intentional, but no one could say which. Dispatcher decisions, neighbor recollections, and officer logs all conflicted in subtle ways that suggested the ordinary call had been anything but ordinary. When audio engineers slowed the tape one last time, they noticed a detail almost everyone had missed. At 2:28 a.m., a faint click, followed immediately by a whispering exhale, then silence. Not Clara's voice. Not background scraping. Something else, somewhere else. It was over in less than a second, a moment so brief that the human ear would dismiss it entirely, but recorded forever. And in that split second, the story had already changed. The audience is left with one thought, chilling in its simplicity. The call had captured the truth, but no one had understood it in time. Weeks after the 911 call, the investigation shifted from immediate response to deeper scrutiny. The call, once thought routine, became the centerpiece of a tangled puzzle. Every subtle sound, every pause in Clara's voice, every discrepancy in the logs demanded explanation, but none could provide closure. Audio experts revisited the recording. Slowed down, enhanced, looped. That faint scraping, the sound that had seemed harmless at first, was finally placed, a chair dragged across the hardwood floor, a movement deliberate but brief. Yet the pattern did not match Clara's reported movements. It seemed, instead, to be repeating in places where she wasn't, echoing inconsistently with her position in the apartment. The logical explanation suggested another presence. But no one could identify who, or what, it was. Investigators discovered prior calls made from Clara's residence over the preceding year. Nothing criminal, nothing alarming, mostly misdialed numbers, minor disturbances, but one call stood out. A similar faint noise appeared in the background, a scraping, a brief shuffle, quickly silenced. The technician who analyzed it hesitated. The pattern was not exact, but unmistakably familiar. Could the previous call have been an early warning? Or just coincidence? There was no way to know. Clara's personal life offered more questions than answers. Her smart home system revealed logs of lights turning on and off at odd hours, doors briefly unlocking and locking again. No evidence of forced entry. No explanations. When she accessed her phone records, she noticed messages automatically deleted, messages she didn't recall sending or receiving. The missing communications left gaps in the timeline that could never be reconstructed. Multiple plausible interpretations emerged. Perhaps someone had entered the apartment during the call, testing her reactions, or perhaps Clara's instincts had exaggerated ordinary noises amplified by stress. Another possibility, a mechanical fault in the apartment, a loose vent, a shifting floorboard, or a faulty appliance, produced the sounds. Yet no mechanical analysis fully matched the audio's rhythm or pauses. Even the dispatcher, reviewing the call months later, offered divergent explanations. Had they misinterpreted a hint in Clara's voice? Had the unseen presence known the line was open, pausing until the caller mentioned the noise? Was the sound simply misheard, a trick of human perception? No definitive answer could reconcile the conflicting accounts. The authorities eventually closed the case officially. No evidence of crime. Call resolved. No further action required. Public records noted nothing unusual beyond the initial 911 call. But internally, the call was flagged as a cautionary anomaly. The kind of event that stays with dispatchers, whispered about during training, but never fully explained. 2:17:43 a.m. Can you tell me exactly what you're hearing right now? The dispatcher asks, fingers hovering over the keyboard as the call timer ticks. The woman answers in a calm whisper, saying nothing unusual, just that she thinks someone's outside. But beneath her voice, the recording captures a steady sound the system tags as background. A faint scrape, then a pause, then a second scrape, perfectly timed. It doesn't match footsteps. It doesn't match wind. The dispatcher ignores it. Everyone does. Until later, when audio engineers slow the call down and realize the sound isn't coming from outside the house at all. And that raises a question no one wants to answer. If the noise was already inside, who was she really calling about? 2:17 a.m. was the exact moment the call came through. The dispatcher, trained for emergencies but exhausted from the overnight shift, answered with the usual calm cadence. 911, what's your emergency? On the line was Clara Hayes, 34, a freelance graphic designer living alone in a suburban cul-de-sac. Her voice was steady but quiet, tinged with that subtle tremor people get when they think they might be overreacting. There was no prior history of calls from her residence. No reports of trouble. She had never needed the police before. I think someone's outside my house, Clara said, whispering, almost as if the walls could hear her too. Her tone was measured. She repeated herself in short, clipped sentences. Pauses filled the spaces between her words, not silence exactly, but small breaths, careful and deliberate. The dispatcher asked her questions that night would normally trigger reflexive answers. How many people? Are you armed? Are the doors locked? Clara answered each calmly. She moved from room to room, describing her view through the blinds, noting which windows were shut, which doors were locked, and confirming that she had her phone with her at all times. Then it began, the background noise. At first, it was subtle, easy to dismiss, a faint scrape, like the tip of a chair leg shifting across the hardwood floor. Another scrape followed, almost rhythmically, but the dispatcher and Clara interpreted it as outside sounds, wind, maybe a branch brushing the siding. I don't know what that is, Clara admitted. Her voice trembled slightly, though she didn't panic. Maybe the dog? She didn't have a dog. The sound repeated, slow, deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Each interval felt intentional, but it was faint enough that the dispatcher typed notes without raising concern. Minutes stretched. The conversation continued with measured questions and careful answers. Clara gave her address again, repeated the details of her neighborhood, mentioned the dim streetlight outside her front door. She answered each clarification like someone practicing calmness under pressure. The dispatcher's notes reflected the initial interpretation. Possible trespasser outside, single caller, no immediate threat visible. Officers were dispatched to the location, just a routine check. Nothing suggested anything extraordinary. At 2:22 a.m., 5 minutes into the call, Clara mentioned a new detail. I think I hear it moving. Closer? She didn't yell. She didn't scream. Her voice remained quiet, tense, controlled. The scrape had shifted, now echoing from a hallway just out of frame from her living room. The dispatcher paused but didn't detect urgency beyond a potential intruder outside. "Stay on the line," they instructed. "Officers are on the way." The following minutes were ordinary, almost procedural. Clara described the layout of her apartment, mentioned locking the back door again, and repeated the approximate locations of windows. The background noise persisted, but it was faint, just enough to be recorded, not enough to be recognized as a clear danger. By 2:29 a.m., dispatchers logged the expected arrival time of the first unit, 6 minutes. Clara continued whispering, breathing shallowly, describing imagined shadows and fleeting movements. Each time she mentioned the scraping, she minimized it, trying to remain rational. She reassured herself as much as the dispatcher reassured her. When the officers arrived at 2:35 a.m., the initial interpretation still held, a routine check, perhaps a false alarm, a misunderstanding. They knocked, called out, and surveyed the exterior. Nothing appeared amiss. No forced entries. No visible footprints. Nothing to indicate immediate danger. Inside, the faint scraping had stopped. Not because the source had left. Not because it had been investigated. It had simply paused, swallowed by the quiet of the night, or so they assumed. The call concluded with the dispatcher logging a clear, no further action status, unaware that every subtle sound they had dismissed contained a clue, one that would only become chillingly clear later. The audiences left believing this was a simple, calm, routine emergency. And yet, the tiny, deliberate noises, the scraping, the pauses, the background breathing, hint that the ordinary was already fractured. Something extraordinary had begun, hidden in plain sound, waiting to reveal its true meaning. By the following morning, the 911 call had been logged, time-stamped, and filed, another routine overnight incident. But when the audio team at the dispatch center reviewed it later, something about the recording gnawed at them. At first, it had sounded ordinary, a woman reporting a possible intruder, background noise dismissed as environmental. But slowed down, enhanced, and isolated through new audio software, the call became something else entirely. The faint scraping that Clara had described was not random. The rhythm was too deliberate, too precise to be furniture shifting or branches brushing siding. Enhanced recordings revealed subtle variations, micropauses, shifts in pitch, and tiny echoes. It was as if the sound was moving across the room, changing direction. Something that had been interpreted as outside the apartment had clearly been inside, somewhere Clara couldn't see. Audio experts were brought in to analyze it. "Could be a person," one technician said cautiously. "Or something mechanical." Another disagreed, noting that the scraping's timing suggested intent, a deliberate pacing. Each interpretation contradicted the last. Some insisted it could be the building settling. Others argued that no ordinary settling produces intervals this precise. For Clara, life returned to quiet routines, but the sense of unease lingered. She would wake at night, listening for the faint scrape she had heard that morning, questioning if it had ever stopped or if it had simply faded into her memory. The mystery was never solved. The scraping, the clicks, the micropauses in her voice, they could mean any number of things, or nothing at all. The truth might have been heard, recorded, and analyzed, yet remained completely out of reach. No one could prove whether the threat had been real, accidental, mechanical, or malicious. No one could reconstruct what had transpired in those critical minutes. The silence in the apartment, once dismissed, became heavier in hindsight. The case files were archived, but the audio remained, slowed, enhanced, analyzed, replayed, and still indecipherable in totality. And the last haunting realization lingered. The 911 call had captured the truth, if only in part, but no one had understood it when it mattered most.